Chapter 20. The MÁZINDARÁN Upheaval, Part 2. The forces under the command of Prince Mehdi Kuli Mirza meanwhile had recovered from the state of utter demoralization into which they had sunk, and were now diligently preparing to renew their attack upon the occupants of the fort of Tabasi. The latter found themselves again encompassed by a numerous host, at the head of which marched Abbas Kuli Khan-i Larijani and Suleiman Khan-i Afshar-i Shariari, who, together with several regiments of infantry and cavalry, had hastened to reinforce the company of the prince's soldiers. Their combined forces encamped in the neighborhood of the fort and proceeded to erect a series of 7 barricades around it. With the utmost arrogance, they sought at first to display the extent of the forces at their command, and indulged with increasing zest in the daily exercise of their arms. The scarcity of water had, in the meantime, compelled those who were besieged to dig a well within the enclosure of the fort. On the day the work was to be completed, the 8th day of the month of Rabiul Awwal, the 1st of February, AD 1849, Mullah Hussein, who was watching his companions perform this task, remarked, "Today we shall have all the water we require for our bath. Cleansed of all earthly defilements, we shall seek the court of the Almighty, and shall hasten to our eternal abode. Whoso is willing to partake of the cup of martyrdom, let him prepare himself and wait for the hour when he can seal with his life-blood his faith in his cause. This night, ere the hour of dawn, let those who wish to join me be ready to issue forth from behind these walls, and, scattering once again the dark forces which have beset our path, ascend untrammeled to the heights of glory." That same afternoon, Mullah Hussein performed his ablutions, clothed himself in new garments, attired his head with a barb's turban, and prepared for the approaching encounter. An undefinable joy illumined his face. He serenely alluded to the hour of his departure, and continued to his last moments to animate the zeal of his companions. Alone with Qudus, who so powerfully reminded him of his beloved, he poured forth, as he sat at his feet, in the closing moments of his earthly life, all that an enraptured soul could no longer restrain. Soon after midnight, as soon as the morning star had risen, the star that heralded to him the dawning light of eternal reunion with his beloved, he started to his feet, and, mounting his charger, gave the signal that the gate of the fort be opened. As he rode out at the head of 313 of his companions to meet the enemy, the cry of "Ya Sahibus Saman" again broke forth, a cry so intense and powerful that forest, fort, and camp vibrated to its resounding echo. Mullah Hussein first charged the barricade, which was defended by Zakariya-i Qadi Kalai, one of the enemy's most valiant officers. Within a short space of time he had broken through that barrier, disposed of his commander, and scattered his men. Dashing forward with the same swiftness and intrepidity, he overcame the resistance of both the 2nd and 3rd barricades, diffusing as he advanced despair and consternation among his foes. Undeterred by the bullets which rained continually upon him and his companions, they pressed forward until the remaining barricades had all been captured and overthrown. In the midst of the tumult which ensued, Abbas Kuli Khan-i Larijani had climbed a tree and, hiding himself in its branches, lay waiting in ambush for his opponents. Protected by the darkness which surrounded him, he was able to follow from his hiding place the movements of Mullah Hussein and his companions, who were exposed to the fierce glare of the conflagration which they had raised. The steed of Mullah Hussein suddenly became entangled in the rope of an adjoining tent, and ere he was able to extricate himself, he was struck in the breast by a bullet from his treacherous assailant. Though the shot was successful, Abbas Kuli Khan was unaware of the identity of the horseman he had wounded. Mullah Hussein, who was bleeding profusely, dismounted from his horse, staggered a few steps, and, unable to proceed further, fell exhausted upon the ground. 2 of his young companions, of Khorasan, Kuli, and Hassan, came to his rescue and bore him to the fort. I have heard the following account from Mullah Sadiq and Mullah Mirza Muhammadi Farooqi. We were among those who had remained in the fort with Qudus. As soon as Mullah Hussein, who seemed to have lost consciousness, was brought in, we were ordered to retire. "Leave me alone with him," were the words of Qudus as he bade Mirza Muhammad Baqir close the door and refuse admittance to anyone desiring to see him. "There are certain confidential matters which I desire him alone to know." We were amazed a few minutes later when we heard the voice of Mullah Hussein replying to questions from Qudus. For 2 hours they continued to converse with each other. We were surprised to see Mirza Muhammad Baqir so greatly agitated. "I was watching Qudus," he subsequently informed us, "through a fissure in the door. As soon as he called his name, I saw Mullah Hussein arise and seat himself in his customary manner on bended knees beside him. With bowed head and downcast eyes, he listened to every word that fell from the lips of Qudus and answered his questions. 'You have hastened the hour of your departure,' I was able to hear Qudus remark, 'and have abandoned me to the mercy of my foes. Please God, I will ere long join you and taste the sweetness of heaven's ineffable delights.' I was able to gather the following words uttered by Mullah Hussein: 'May my life be a ransom for you. Are you well pleased with me?' A long time elapsed before Qudus bade Mirza Muhammad Baqir to open the door and admit his companions. 'I have bade my last farewell to him,' he said as we entered the room. 'Things which previously I deemed it unallowable to utter, I have now shared with him.' We found on our arrival that Mullah Hussein had expired. A faint smile still lingered upon his face. Such was the peacefulness of his countenance that he seemed to have fallen asleep. Qudus attended to his burial, clothed him in his own shirt, and gave instructions to lay him to rest to the south of it, and adjoining the shrine of Sheikh Tabasi. 'Well is it with you to have remained to your last hour faithful to the covenant of God,' he said as he laid a parting kiss upon his eyes and forehead. 'I pray God to grant that no division ever be caused between you and me.' He spoke with such poignancy that the 7 companions who were standing beside him wept profusely and wished they had been sacrificed in his stead. Qudus, with his own hands, laid the body in the tomb and cautioned those who were standing near him to maintain secrecy regarding the spot which served as his resting place, and to conceal it even from their companions. He afterwards instructed them to inter the bodies of the 36 martyrs who had fallen in the course of that engagement in one and the same grave on the northern side of the shrine of Sheikh Tabasi. 'Let the loved ones of God,' he was heard to remark as he consigned them to their tomb, 'take heed of the example of these martyrs of our faith. Let them in life be and remain as united as these are now in death.' No less than 90 of the companions were wounded that night, most of whom succumbed. From the day of their arrival at Baha'i to the day they were first attacked, which fell on the 12th of Zil Qadi in the year AH 1264, the 10th of October AD 1848, to the day of the death of Mullah Hussein, which took place at the hour of dawn on the 9th of Rabiul Awwal in the year AH 1265, the 2nd of February AD 1849, the number of martyrs, according to the computation of Mirza Muhammad Baqir, had reached a total of 72. From the time when Mullah Hussein was assailed by his enemies to the time of his martyrdom was 116 days, a period rendered memorable by deeds so heroic that even his bitterest foes felt bound to confess their wonder. On 4 distinct occasions he rose to such heights of courage and power as few indeed could attain. The first encounter took place on the 12th of Zil Qadi, the 10th of October, AD 1848, in the outskirts of Baha'i, the second in the immediate neighborhood of the fort of Sheikh Tabasi, on the 5th day of the month of Muharram, the 1st of December, AD 1848, against the forces of Abdullah Khan-i Turkaman. The third in Vaskaz, on the 25th day of Muharram, the 21st of December, AD 1848, and was directed against the army of Prince Mihdi Quli Mirza. The last and most memorable battle of all was directed against the combined forces of Abbas Quli Khan, of Prince Mihdi Quli Mirza, and of Suleiman Khan-i Afshar, assisted by a company of 45 officers of tried ability and mature experience. From each of these hot and fierce engagements, Mullah Hussein emerged, in spite of the overwhelming forces arrayed against him, unscathed and triumphant. In each encounter he distinguished himself by such acts of valor, of chivalry, of skill, and of strength, that each one alone would suffice to establish for all time the transcendent character of a faith for the protection of which he had so valiantly fought, and in the path of which he had so nobly died. The traits of mind and of character which, from his very youth, he displayed, the profundity of his learning, the tenacity of his faith, his intrepid courage, his singleness of purpose, his high sense of justice and unswerving devotion, marked him as an outstanding figure among those who, by their lives, have borne witness to the glory and power of the new revelation. He was 36 years old when he quaffed the cup of martyrdom. At the age of 18, he had made the acquaintance, in Karbala, of Syed Kazim Rashdi. For 9 years he sat at his feet and imbibed the lesson which was destined to prepare him for the acceptance of the message of the Bab. The 9 remaining years of his life were spent in the midst of a restless, feverish activity which carried him eventually to the field of martyrdom, in circumstances that have shed imperishable lustre upon his country's history. So complete and humiliating a rout paralyzed for a time the efforts of the enemy. 45 days passed before they could again reassemble their forces and renew their attack. During these intervening days, which ended with the day of Nauruz, the intense cold which prevailed induced them to defer their venture against an opponent that had covered them with so much reproach and shame. Though their attacks had been suspended, the officers in charge of the remnants of the imperial army had given strict orders prohibiting the arrival of all manner of reinforcements at the fort. When the supply of their provisions was nearly exhausted, Qudus instructed Mirza Muhammad Baqir to distribute among his companions the rice which Mullah Hussein had stored for such time as might be required. When each had received his portion, Qudus summoned them and said, "Whoever feels himself strong enough to withstand the calamities that are soon to befall us, let him remain with us in this fort. And whoever perceives in himself the least hesitation and fear, let him betake himself away from this place. Let him leave immediately ere the enemy has again assembled his forces and assailed us. The way will soon be barred before our face. We shall very soon encounter the severest hardship and fall a victim to devastating afflictions." The very night Qudus had given this warning, a Syed from Qum, Mirza Hussein-i Mutawali, was moved to betray his companions. "Why is it," he wrote to Abbas Quli Khan-i Larijani, "that you have left unfinished the work which you have begun? You have already disposed of a formidable opponent. By the removal of Mullah Hussein, who was the moving force behind these walls, you have demolished the pillar on which the strength and security of the fort depend. Had you been patient for one more day, you would have assuredly won for yourself the laurels of victory. With no more than 100 men, I pledge my word that within the space of 2 days you will be able to capture the fort and secure the unconditional surrender of its occupants. They are worn with famine and are being grievously tested." The sealed letter was entrusted to a certain Syed Ali-i Zargar, who, as he carried with him the share of the rice he had received from Qudus, stole out of the fort at the hour of midnight and delivered it to Abbas Quli Khan, with whom he was already acquainted. The message reached him at a time when he had sought refuge in a village situated at a distance of 4 farsangs from the fort, and knew not whether he should return to the capital and present himself after such a humiliating defeat to his sovereign, or repair to his home in Larijan, where he was sure to face the reproaches of his relations and friends. He had just risen from his bed when, at the hour of sunrise, the Syed brought him the letter. The news of the death of Mullah Hussein nerved him to a fresh resolve. Fearing lest the messenger should spread the report concerning the death of so redoubtable an opponent, he instantly killed him, and then contrived by some strange device to divert from himself the suspicion of murder. Resolved to take the fullest advantage of the distress of the besieged and of the depletion of their forces, he undertook immediately the necessary preparations for the resumption of his attacks. 10 days before Nauruz, he had encamped at half a farsang from the fort, and had ascertained the accuracy of the message that treacherous Syed had brought him. In the hope of obtaining for himself every possible credit for the eventual surrender of his opponents, he refused to divulge to even his closest officers the information he had received. The day had just broken when he hoisted his standard and, marching at the head of 2 regiments of infantry and cavalry, encompassed the fort and ordered his men to open fire upon the sentinels who were guarding the turrets. The betrayer, Qudus informed Mirza Muhammad Baqir, who had hastened to acquaint him with the gravity of the situation, has announced the death of Mullah Hussein to Abbas Quli Khan. Emboldened by his removal, he is now determined to storm our stronghold and to secure for himself the honor of being its sole conqueror. Sally out and, with the aid of 18 men marching at your side, administer a befitting chastisement upon the aggressor and his host. Let him realize that though Mullah Hussein be no more, God's invincible power still continues to sustain his companions and enable them to triumph over the forces of their enemies. No sooner had Mirza Muhammad Baqir selected his companions than he ordered that the gate of the fort be flung open. Leaping upon their chargers and raising the cry of Ya Sahibus Saman, they plunged headlong into the camp of the enemy. The whole army fled in confusion before so terrific a charge. All but a few were able to escape. They reached Barfurush utterly demoralized and laden with shame. Abbas Quli Khan was so shaken with fear that he fell from his horse. Leaving in his distress one of his boots hanging from the stirrup, he ran away half-shod and bewildered in the direction which the army had taken. Filled with despair, he hastened to the prince and confessed the ignominious reverse he had sustained. Mirza Muhammad Baqir, on his part, emerging together with his 18 companions unscathed from that encounter, and holding in his hand the standard which an affrighted enemy had abandoned, repaired with exultation to the fort and submitted to his chief, who had inspired him with such courage, as evidence of his victory. So complete a rout immediately brought relief to the hardened companions. It cemented their unity and reminded them afresh of the efficacy of that power with which their faith had endowed them. Their food, alas, was by this time reduced to the flesh of horses which they had brought away with them from the deserted camp of the enemy. With steadfast fortitude they endured the afflictions which beset them from every side. Their hearts were set on the wishes of Qudus. All else mattered but little. Neither the severity of their distress nor the continual threats of the enemy could cause them to deviate a hair-breadth from the path which their departed companions had so heroically trodden. A few were found who subsequently faltered in the darkest hour of adversity. The faint-heartedness which this negligible element was compelled to betray paled, however, into insignificance before the radiance which the mass of their stout-hearted companions shed in the hour of realized doom. Prince Mihdi Quli Mirza, who was stationed at Sari, welcomed with keen delight the news of the defeat that had overtaken the forces under the immediate command of his colleague, Abbas Quli Khan. Though himself desirous of extirpating the band that had sought shelter behind the walls of the fort, he rejoiced at the knowledge that his rival had failed to secure the victory which he coveted. He wrote immediately to Tehran and demanded that reinforcements in the form of bombshells and camel artillery, with all the necessary equipments, be dispatched without delay to the neighborhood of the fort, he being determined this time to effect the complete subjugation of its obstinate occupants. Whilst their enemies were preparing for yet another and still fiercer attack upon their stronghold, the companions of Qudus, utterly indifferent to the gnawing distress that afflicted them, acclaimed with joy and gratitude the approach of Nowruz. In the course of that festival, they gave free vent to their feelings of thanksgiving and praise in return for the manifold blessings which the Almighty had bestowed upon them. Though oppressed with hunger, they indulged in songs and merriment, utterly disdaining the danger with which they were beset. The fort resounded with the ascriptions of glory and praise which, both in the daytime and in the night season, ascended from the hearts of that joyous band. The verse, "Holy, holy, the Lord our God, the Lord of the angels and the Spirit," issued unceasingly from their lips, heightened their enthusiasm, and reanimated their courage. All that remained of the cattle they had brought with them to the fort was a cow which Haji Naziruddin-i-Qazvini had set aside, and the milk of which he made into a pudding every day for the table of Qudus. Unwilling to deny his hunger-stricken friends their share of the delicacy which his devoted companion prepared for him, Qudus would, after partaking of a few teaspoonfuls of that dish, invariably distribute the rest among them. "I have ceased to enjoy," he was often heard to remark, "since the departure of Mullah Hussein, the meat and drink which they prepare for me. My heart bleeds at the sight of my famished companions, worn and wasted around me." Despite these adverse circumstances, he unfailingly continued further to elucidate in his commentary the significance of the Sad of Samad, and to exhort his friends to persevere till the very end in their heroic endeavors. At morn and at eventide, Mirza Muhammad Baqir would chant, in the presence of the assembled believers, verses from that commentary, the reading of which would quicken their enthusiasm and brighten their hopes. I have heard Mullah Mirza Muhammad-i Faruqi testify to the following: "God knows that we had ceased to hunger for food. Our thoughts were no longer concerned with matters pertaining to our daily bread. We were so enraptured by the entrancing melody of those verses that, were we to have continued for years in that state, no trace of weariness and fatigue could possibly have dimmed our enthusiasm or marred our gladness. And whenever the lack of nourishment would tend to sap our vitality and weaken our strength, Mirza Muhammad Baqir would hasten to Qudus and acquaint him with our plight. A glimpse of his face, the magic of his words as he walked amongst us, would transmute our despondency into golden joy. We were reinforced with a strength of such intensity that, had the host of our enemies appeared suddenly before us, we felt ourselves capable of subjugating their forces." On the day of Nowruz, which fell on the 24th of Rabi' Thani, in the year A.H. 1265, A.D. 1849, Qudus alluded, in a written message to his companions, to the approach of such trials as would bring in their wake the martyrdom of a considerable number of his friends. A few days later, an innumerable host, commanded by Prince Mihdi Quli Mirza and seconded by the joint forces of Suleiman Khan-i Afshar, of Abbas Quli Khan-i Larijani, and of Jafar Quli Khan, assisted by about 40 other officers, encamped in the neighborhood of the fort and set about constructing a series of trenches and barricades in its immediate vicinity. On the 9th day of the month of Bahar, a footnote says the 9th day after Nowruz, the commanding officer gave orders to those in charge of his artillery to open fire in the direction of the besieged. While the bombardment was in progress, Qudus emerged from his room and walked to the center of the fort. His face was wreathed in smiles, and his demeanor breathed forth the utmost tranquillity. As he was pacing the floor, a cannonball suddenly fell before him. "How utterly unaware," he calmly remarked as he rolled it with his foot, "are those boastful aggressors of the power of God's avenging wrath. Have they forgotten that a creature as insignificant as a gnat was capable of extinguishing the life of the all-powerful Nimrod? Have they not heard that the roaring of the tempest was sufficient to destroy the people of Ad and Thamud, and to annihilate their forces? Seek they to intimidate the heroes of God, in whose sight the pomp of royalty is but an empty shadow, with such contemptible evidences of their cruelty? You are," he added as he turned to his friends, "those same companions of whom Muhammad, the apostle of God, has thus spoken. Oh, how I long to behold the countenance of my brethren who will appear in the end of the world. Blessed are we, blessed are they, greater is their blessedness than ours. Beware lest you allow the encroachments of self and desire to impair so glorious a station. Fear not the threats of the wicked, neither be dismayed by the clamor of the ungodly. Each one of you has his appointed hour, and when that time is come, neither the assaults of your enemy nor the endeavors of your friends will be able either to retard or to advance that hour. If the powers of the earth league themselves against you, they will be powerless, ere that hour strikes, to lessen by one jot or tittle the span of your life. Should you allow your hearts to be agitated for but one moment by the boomings of these guns which, with increasing violence, will continue to shower their shot upon this fort, you will have cast yourselves out of the stronghold of divine protection." So powerful an appeal could not fail to breathe confidence into the hearts of those who heard it. A few, however, whose countenances betrayed vacillation and fear, were seen huddled together in a sheltered corner of the fort, viewing with envy and surprise the zeal that animated their companions. The army of Prince Mihdi Quli Mirza continued for a few days to fire in the direction of the fort. His men were surprised to find that the booming of their guns had failed to silence the voice of prayer and the acclamations of joy which the besieged raised in answer to their threats. Instead of the unconditional surrender which they expected, the call of the muezzin, the chanting of the verses of the Koran, and the chorus of gladsome voices intoning hymns and thanksgiving and praise reached their ears without ceasing. Exasperated by these evidences of unquenchable fervour, and impelled by a burning desire to extinguish the enthusiasm which swelled within the breasts of his opponents, Jafar Quli Khan erected a tower, upon which he stationed his cannon, and from that eminence directed his fire into the heart of the fort. A footnote here says, "Thus the latter constructed 4 towers on the 4 sides of the castle, and raised them so high that they were able to command the interior of the fortress with their guns, and to make the garrison targets for their bullets. Then the faithful, seeing this, began to dig subterranean passages, and to retreat thither. But the ground of Mazindaran lies near the water, so that these poor sufferers dwelt amidst mud and water till their garments rotted away with damp." From the Tarikh-i-Jadid, page 81. Qurus immediately summoned Mirza Muhammad Baqir and instructed him to sally again and inflict upon the boastful newcomer a humiliation no less crushing than the one which Abbas Quli Khan had suffered. "Let him know," he added, "that God's lion-hearted warriors, when pressed and driven by hunger, are able to manifest deeds of such heroism as no ordinary mortals can show. Let him know that the greater their hunger, the more devastating shall be the effects of their exasperation." Mirza Muhammad Baqir again ordered 18 of his companions to hurry to their steeds and follow him. The gates of the fort were thrown open, and the cry of "Ya Sahibuz Saman," fiercer and more thrilling than ever, diffused panic and consternation in the ranks of the enemy. Jafar Quli Khan, with 30 of his men, fell before the sword of their adversary, who rushed to the tower, captured the guns, and hurled them to the ground. Thence they threw themselves upon the barricades which had been erected, demolished a number of them, and would, but for the approaching darkness, have captured and destroyed the rest.